And let's go ahead and start. Well, I'll bring this city council work session into session. So welcome to 12th and city council work session for January 24th, 2022. I have a pretty full agenda tonight, so we'll get right to it. We're leading off with a presentation by Ridwell, and we'll lead off with Lindsay Marshall giving the introduction.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. It's good to see everybody. So we are here this evening to discuss Ridwell, which is a subscription-based service for items that are hard to recycle. And I'm going to be joined by Caleb Weaver, a representative from Ridwell, who has a brief presentation, and then he and I will both be available for some Q&A afterwards. As a brief kind of how we got here, Ridwell reached out to the city in the summer of 2021, letting us know of their intention to do business within the city of Tualatin. So internally, we got together some staff to talk about the service, as well as some relevant information from the region and other local jurisdictions who were in conversations with Ridwell about their services. And through that process, we learned that there's been some pushback and some regulatory considerations regarding Ridwell services, but it does seem to be a service that the community is interested in having. And so staff met with Ridwell in the fall to learn more about who they are and what they do, and to explore some avenues to move forward to do business within the city. And from there, it was determined that we wanted to bring it to council for further discussion and consideration. And so at this point, we're looking for direction on how to proceed if Ridwell services are something that council are interested in for Tualatin. So hopefully by the end of our discussion this evening, council will be able to provide staff with some guidance on what to do next. And so without further ado, I'll see if Caleb is here and ready, and he can kick off our conversation.
Lindsay, thank you for the introduction, Mayor, members of council. Thank you so much for the opportunity to say a few words to you all today, and look forward to the discussion. My name is Caleb Weaver, and I handle public affairs for Ridwell. I've got a short presentation, so if it's okay to share my screen here, I will throw that up, and hopefully that works. And I can quickly run through that, and then of course happy to answer any questions either throughout or as we wrap up. So very quickly, I'm going to take a step back, just do a bit of a overview of sort of the issues in the environment that Ridwell stepped into and why we exist at all. And so this goes back a number of years, and there's a number of items that are just a challenge to recycle. They're things that can be recycled, but for very good reasons. They're difficult. Plastic bags, plastic film, when those go into commingled recycling bins that are serviced largely by the traditional garbage haulers as part of the curbside service that cities and counties organize, those plastic bags and that plastic film jam up their sorting machines. And if you do a search, you'll see what kind of problems those cause. Similarly, batteries and light bulbs, well-known challenges, cause fires, cause safety risks to workers at the garbage hauling industry, So this is a long-term problem. This problem sort of got worse as an increasing sense of hopelessness is that a lot of people felt over the course of the 2010s, particularly after China soared and China stopped accepting a lot of the recycling that was being collected in the United States. And so a lot of questions started to come up of what can we actually recycle? And as you all know, unfortunately, that meant that a number of items that had previously been part of curbside programs no longer became part of curbside programs. And again, I would emphasize some of these materials are very challenging to collect in a curbside program. So one family's response to this problem, and again, this was our founder and CEO and his son, had this idea they were going to collect as much of this stuff that they knew didn't have to go into their garbage bin and see if they could find places to drop it off and around the city of Seattle. And they realized that they didn't want to drive an empty car when they were taking stuff around. So they asked their neighbors, like, hey, do you have any of this stuff? We're happy to take your stuff as well. And they got such a response that they tried it again a couple weeks later, and they posted it on Nextdoor for anybody in the community. And they got such a response that they ended up creating a list of folks in their neighborhood that were interested in having somebody help them identify places that could reuse or recycle items that they didn't know what to do with, or they knew what to do with, but it was just a challenge for them to get to the drop-off location, either because they were too busy or they had mobility issues. And that was the beginning of what was initially Owen's List. And that it caught on very quickly. Several thousand people signed up over the course of a few months. And that turned into Ridwell. And Ryan, again, our co-founder, sort of had the realization that, like, wait a minute, there's a lot of people that want to do the right thing. They want to do a little bit more than what they can do through the curbside program. But for whatever reason, that presents a challenge, and they're happy to have a little bit of help. And so what did Ryan try to do, and where did Ridwell come from? So the whole goal here is to make it easy for households to divert these items that are only picked up to go to the landfill through the curbside program. And so trying to just make it really easy. We use reusable sorting bags, very simple instructions. This was something that was developed with Ryan's son. And so the whole thought was a 6-year-old could figure this out. And that's really designed to be, quite frankly, a family project. And what we offer is easy bi-weekly pickup of these items that are part of our service. And I want to emphasize, it's a limited group of items that are part of our service. We are not collecting, and I'll hit this a few times. We are not just simply collecting stuff and then trying to figure out what to do with it. We identify items that there is a partner that can reuse or recycle those items. And then we offer folks the opportunity to help transport those items from their household to that partner who can reuse or recycle them. So what is it? What are the categories that are included? It's a mix, as I said, of reusable and recyclable items. Reusables are really our focus in a lot of ways. I mean, that's what we really want to help people increase. And quite frankly, by both weight and number of categories, we do far more reusables than we do recyclables. And that is our goal, is to try and help people do as much reuse as possible. So, it's everything from cookware, as you can see here, to books, to clothes. If it can be reused and it's sitting around somebody's house, our goal is to find a local organization that wants those items and can reuse it. So rather than waiting for your spring cleaning to toss all those things in the landfill or try to figure out where they're going to go, we connect households with local organizations that can reuse or recycle them. The remaining items, again, are recyclable. And again, these are all items that are not part of the curbside recycling service provided by the garbage haulers organized by the city. So again, this is for Clackamas, apologies, but you get a sense of what we are focusing on this slide. If it's something that is being directed to go into the curbside bin, it's not something we're interested in. There's no reason for folks to use our service for items that they can use their curbside recycle bin for. We are only focused on those items that are only picked up to go to the landfill as part of the curbside service. So then we want to be as efficient and efficient as possible. So we only go to houses I apologize, let me take a step back. Our members subscribe. They get a subscription. It can be month to month. They can make a longer commitment for a slightly lower price. And we only go to our members' houses when they indicate that they have something for us to pick up. So we actually redo our routing. We use these vans that look like the one on your screen. We're not running big trucks. Big trucks don't make sense. They don't work for the service. So again, it's just a very different business model than what you will see with your haulers. Because of the nature of the items that are being picked up. And again, we're only going to those houses that say they've got something for us. So we're trying to be as efficient as we possibly can. Here's a view of our warehouse where the items are brought back after they are picked up. As I sort of referenced earlier, we provide our members with reusable cloth bags. So all of the items are separated by the household. We are not doing any of the separation into anything. So all that's happening at our warehouse is that the bags are coming back and they're emptied and put and consolidated with the like items from other members' households and then prepared for transportation. So the one thing that we do is some baling of the plastic film, and in the Portland area, the plastic clamshells. So that does happen in the warehouse. But other than that, it's really just emptying the items, pulling out some of the stuff that our partners can't take, that is disposed of properly. But again, we publish very clearly how much ends up in our bags that our partners can take on our transparency page. So again, I'll reference that later, but we're very upfront about exactly how much we get that isn't something that our partners can accept. But again, it's a very small amount. We try to use local partners wherever possible. So our partners are concentrated in the Portland area. Almost all of our reuse partners are in the Portland area. And again, that focus is finding those local organizations that can reuse items that households have and making that connection. When a local partner is not available, for instance, for plastic film or the plastic clamshells, we do find regional or national partners to help. And you can see a map and a list of some of the partners that we work with here. I can't emphasize enough, a real focus on community. I mean, this grew out of a family project, and the idea is how do we help address these community needs, whether it's the needs of the households that are looking for ways to divert some of the items that they're putting into their garbage bin, or for the organizations that we partner with, and how do we help them get items that they need. So for instance, working with the Children's Book Bank, they came to us and they said, our summer program is in danger. Can you help connect us with people who have kids' books? And so that was one of the featured categories last year, and that enabled the Children's Book Bank in the Portland area to have their summer program last year. And so it's that match of all those parents out there who've got lots of kids' books that aren't being used, but getting them to an organization that's actually going to need them. So we are fully transparent on our partners and the contamination that comes in our bags. So on our website, broken down by market, can see exactly what partner is receiving the items that we are collecting for them. So we want to be very upfront, no questions for anybody there. Again, as well as the amount of contamination. So the reason behind this is that we really want people to have trust that by doing a little bit more, they can make a difference, and to get over that sort of that challenge of many years now of news stories that, not wrong, but news stories highlighting how recycling that they thought was getting recycled wasn't actually getting recycled. Finally, we are 100% committed to regulatory compliance. The challenge that we've run into is that our business model sometimes doesn't really fit cleanly into the way things have been done in the past. And sometimes the regs are a little unclear as to where we might fit. But we have no concerns about, again, registering, sharing information about our business, providing reports on what materials we are collecting, how much, getting insurance, all of that stuff. The sort of standard regulations for operating. That's not an issue. Our challenge has just been, as Lindsay referenced at the top, has been that, again, how we fit into some of the existing regulations. And so, we were encouraged by the conversations last fall that the city of Tualatin was interested in trying to come up with a way that made sense and that worked. So, if there's a Dropbox franchise type model that works for the city of Tualatin, that's absolutely something that we are interested in. Again, our understanding of the current state law and existing regulatory situation is that there's no blocker for us to operate. But we also understand that there's an interest in ensuring that people who are operating are meeting certain standards, and we are fully supportive of that and look forward to a cooperative conversation on how we can achieve that goal. So we have been welcomed by cities across the areas where we operate, and we've had a really tremendous response from the public in the Portland area, with over 20,000 households signing up in just a year across the Portland area. So really, really exciting. We are also operating now in Colorado, and literally just within the past couple of weeks. I'm trying to do my math here. It's been a long January, in Minneapolis as well. And again, our members really, they love the convenience of it. There's a lot of folks out there that really are interested in doing more and have really embraced this opportunity. Again, whether it's because they have a young family and getting to a drop-off location is just a real challenge, or again, they have mobility issues, whatever the challenge might be, making use of a service like ours. Again, we are designed to be entirely complementary of the other opportunities that people have for reuse and recycling. And in this sort of modern day, particularly coming out of the pandemic, when people do seem to expect to be able to do things from the comfort of their own home, we offer the ability for folks to do that in the area of waste reduction. So again, comes back to the beginning of why we started. This really was an environmental project with our founder and his son, and trying to make it possible for households to do a little bit more to invest in the future and invest in doing what they can, even if it's just a little bit. But this is unfortunately tackling our environmental challenges. It's going to require a little bit in a lot of different places by a lot of different people. And again, this is one of those areas where households can contribute a little bit. And our goal is to help them do that. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions, and I will stop sharing. I can figure out how to do that. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Questions for Mr. Weaver or for Lindsay, either Councilor Pratt.
I was wondering, I read an article where it was a spokesperson for Ridwell saying that there was concerns about profitability just because of the transportation cost of taking these products. So I'm wondering if your company has looked at, it's great with recycling. I'm the biggest fan of recycling, and these things shouldn't go into landfills if at all possible. But the cost of transporting these, and your vans don't look like they're electric vehicles. I could be wrong. So have you looked at the cost of the transportation of this, and the carbon emissions as opposed to, the use of the plastics, if there's a way to quantify that?
Yeah, so it is a challenge, and there are some good studies out there that really look at just any of the recycling. The environmental benefit is very, very significant, and what we're talking about here again, that plastic film, but then the batteries and the light bulbs, those are not supposed to go into the curbside containers anyway, so people should be driving those items to somewhere to drop them off and dispose of them properly. And what we're doing is really doing that more efficiently. We're running one vehicle through a neighborhood every 2 weeks, as opposed to those individuals taking them and driving themselves in an otherwise empty vehicle. And then I don't know if this is what you're getting at, but on the cost of the materials and our ability to make money. So again, this is another area where again it's a slightly different business model. Is that our business model isn't based on earning money from the materials that we collect. We are providing a service where we identify partners who can reuse and recycle items, and again, really that priority on that reuse. And then the households are paying for the service, and that's that membership fee that folks pay. And so that's really how we cover the costs of doing the pickups and the transportation to our partners. And again, some of the transportation we pay for, some of the transportation, again, it varies by partner. Sometimes folks come pick it up, sometimes we're doing it. But we have worked out a business model that we've now replicated in a number of cities where, again, that subscription service, the subscription fee is what covers the cost of the service. And again, it's not reliant on the materials that we're picking.
Okay, and then I guess my hope would be that in 10 years you're out of business because we don't have these products, but I don't know if that's what your company's goal is. And then my other question is, has your company thought of, this is great for people like me who could pay $15, $16 a month, but what about people that live in apartments and really don't have any extra cash? Do you have any plans to reach out to those communities in the future?
Sure. Yeah. So great question. So we have been very clear that if we put ourselves out of business, that's a big victory. And I want to emphasize, if there's a decision made that, for instance, the plastic clamshells are going to now be collected again in the curbside recycle bins, they immediately stop becoming part of our service. We're not touching anything. If all of the materials that we are collecting for recycling are no longer used, that's fantastic. I would note that one of the things we were probably most excited about in the last year, a year where we had tens of thousands of new members sign up. One of the things that was most exciting was a pilot that we did with Starbucks, where members could get a reusable cup at a selection of Starbucks locations, and sure, they could take that Starbucks cup back to a Starbucks, but how many of us remember to take our reusable cup every time we want to go? So instead, they could drop their reusable cup in the Ridwell bin, and then we would get it back to Starbucks to be cleaned and go back into circulation. So we actually think that there's a number of other opportunities. Again, we focus so much on reuse because, again, these hard to recycle items, the plastic film gets a lot of focus, but that's really not where we see the future of our service. And again, that's why, again, it sometimes gets lost in some of the public discussions, but in our mind, the reuse and the opportunity to really help educate people. We provide lots of information to our members and encourage them to find ways to not purchase the materials that we collect, because we are a waste reduction service. We are not trying to encourage people to use these items, and again, that's where we see ourselves going. And if we put ourselves out of business because there's no more need for a reuse service, that would be amazing. We don't see that coming soon, but again, we agree with you. If none of the hard to recycle materials are part of our service in the near future, that would be a big one.
And then I've saved my last hard question for you for last. And you referred to it, but we have an ordinance, that we have an exclusive franchise fee with Ordinance 1318-11. And I think that's the tough issue here. You are already taking stuff they probably are not, and that's great that we're doing that, but or you're doing that, but we have an exclusive franchise agreement with these people, and it includes recyclables. So I think that's where I'm having a little tough time here is like what's the benefit, what's the value? We have an agreement that we're going to exclusively deal with them, so that's where I'm having a tough time. Regardless of what a good thing you're doing, it's the fact that we have an exclusive franchise agreement with another company, and a lot of that reason is that we want to be able to kind of make sure, we don't really have a way without regulations to make sure you're doing this safely and equitably and all that. We're relying on, what you're telling us. So I just wondered if you'd speak to that a little bit, because I think that's the big hang up here.
So look, I appreciate the question, and I apologize. I didn't answer your question about individuals for whom price is a barrier. So let me just take 1 second. We serve individuals in multifamily. There's not a barrier there. Sometimes we have building access issues, and so if we run into an issue there, we allow people to get a full refund. But we are happy to serve individuals who live in multifamily units, and we have expanded to a number of arrangements with apartment complexes where we will provide service through the whole complex. So we provide service no matter where folks live. For individuals for whom price is a barrier, we have a scholarship fund that we donate to try to make sure that folks who, again, for whom that is a barrier, that there is an option for them. We've also worked with cities to create other programs that, again, offset the cost for people for whom that's a challenge, and we would love to do the same. On your question about the exclusive agreement, I'm happy to take that directly, in that we don't think a monopoly contract can be read to exclude business activity that is not being performed by the holder of that monopoly contract. The monopoly, the garbage hauler that has that contract is not doing the same service. They are collecting materials. They are collecting certain materials for recycling. The other materials are all being collected to go to the landfill. Our service provides a way for people to get materials that they choose not to put in the garbage bin and recycle or reuse them. So we are not competing with any of the recyclable materials. We are not competing with any of the landfill. So it is a separate service. And so the read that we are somehow infringing on their contract, we think is just not accurate. It is a different service. And to the extent that the city of Tualatin would like to have greater regulatory oversight of a service like ours, as I mentioned at the end there, we are supportive of developing policies that would ensure that you all have that oversight. And so again, whether it's a license process or a separate franchise, again, that covers these items that are not included in the curbside service, we are more than happy to engage in that. But again, because we are providing a different service, the garbage hauler is not picking up the items that we are picking up for recycling or reuse.
Okay, I have one last question. Sorry, don't let my other counselors speak, but so does that mean, for instance, if our garbage provider decided all of a sudden they would collect clamshells, then you would no longer do that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It would happen within a week. And it would happen
Great.
as soon as that happens. So yeah, absolutely. We are not competing with them. This is not about attempting to provide a better service. We are complementing. We are taking items that the haulers themselves have identified as problematic and are directing people to not put in their bins, whether it's the batteries and light bulbs that they're being directed to not put in any of the bins, or the plastic film or others that are being directed to just be put in the landfill. And we are getting them to partners for reuse and recycling only.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilor Reyes.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. Very useful and informative. I think as I was reading the presentation and going through the information that was previously provided to us, I think what we need to understand is that, and if I'm understanding it correctly, you are not the same as the Republic services that we have right now, and it's more for the customer asking you to come and pick up those items, and then we pay a fee. Is that basically what I'm understanding? Is that correct?
That's correct. The customer's paying the fee. That's exactly right.
Okay, and then I'm seeing it like, so people go to your app, they download that, and that's where they request your pickup, kind of like what we do when someone picks up my donations outside. When I have an organization that says, hey, can you pick up all these donations that I have? Is that how it works?
So it is. We are a subscription-based service. So somebody would go to our website, or whether they do it on their phone or on their computer, and they would sign up for a subscription. And so what they would get for that when they sign up for a subscription is a metal bin that would go on their front porch or on the side of their house, and reusable cloth bags. And then they would have the opportunity to get a pickup every other week. And the reason that we batch that as opposed to just doing it on call is that we don't really want to be driving empty vans around neighborhoods. So we really value efficiency. We don't want a whole lot of unnecessary traffic going up and down streets. There's enough Amazon trucks as it is. We understand that. So one van going through a neighborhood, well, once every other week.
Right. So I just want to be clear. You're no different than like an Amazon, for instance. We pay a subscription that we get something delivered every 2 days or every 3 days, whatever. And then, I mean, I'm just trying to so I can think of what and other people thinking of. This is not like when I first read it or when I first learned about it, I thought it was similar to a regular trash company or waste company, but it's not like that. It's having a subscription myself that I chose for someone to come and drop off, kind of like we do with Amazon, and you're just providing that service that it's different, right? You're collecting items that I can put like styrofoam, and now more than ever that we're all home in the last 2 years, I've collected more cardboard paper, more boxes and styrofoams and food deliveries that come in those styrofoam things. I don't know what to do with that. I just feel like I'm trying to understand it, and I feel like it makes sense to me that I would want that to be taken. Someone can pick it up and take it, and I don't mind paying a fee for that. So that's basically what I'm trying to understand and reiterate for those who are not reading what I read previously to come to this meeting. So thank you very much for the presentation. I just want to make sure that people understand the difference between this and the waste management company that actually works with the city and all that. Speaking of that, are there any issues of why you're I guess I'm trying to understand, why are we not allowing something like that?
So we see ourselves as entirely complementary and helpful to the garbage haulers because, again, there's no overlap between any of the services. And as you very accurately noted, it is just a fundamentally different business model. We are a subscription service. We are not sorting anything out. We are not gathering a bunch of materials. We let people know, like, hey, look, if you are looking for help, looking for a service that's going to identify ways that you can not put items into the landfill, but get them reused or recycled, here's that list, and here's what you get for the subscription, and providing people with that opportunity. And as you said, it's a different approach and a different model, and it's an optional service that we want to provide to folks.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Brooks.
Hi, Caleb. Thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it, and your service. I guess I just had a couple quick questions, and I do like that you're discussing. I think a lot of times when people think about sustainability, they forget that those R's are in order of effectiveness for sustainability. So the fact that you're doing things for reuse and then recycle at the end is important information. And I guess I'm curious with the donation piece, are people able to still tax write off their donations to these organizations? That's one. We have one of those organizations here in Tualatin, the Community Warehouse, so it's kind of exciting. And I've worked with clients that have had hard points in their lives, that were dealing with serious illness and had to get situated in apartments, and got a lot of support with donated furniture and donated cooking items. So I've seen that work in action, and making that easier to do seems like a really wonderful community service from my viewpoint as a social worker. So can you speak a little bit more? If I were going to donate books, do I write it off? Is there a way of tracking these?
Yeah, absolutely. So we identify the recipient of all of the donated items up front. So everybody knows where they're going to go. So if we're collecting, again, I use the example of the Children's Book Bank, but Community Warehouse has been another. There's been a number of local organizations that and again, the way that it works, which is it reverses things a little bit, which I think you'll understand, is that we go to the organization and we say, hey, look, are there things that you need? So obviously the book bank is an easy one because everybody knows that's what they need. But I'll use an example from Seattle. I apologize because it's top of mind for me. But there's an organization in Seattle that serves individuals who are unhoused, and they just never had enough jeans, because people don't donate jeans and they sort of keep them until they're on their last thread. And as you can imagine, individuals who have fallen hard on their luck, they need jeans frequently. And so we approached them, they said, hey, look, we love all of the other stuff that people donate, but if you could get jeans, that would be fantastic. And so we had our featured category. And so every week there we have sort of our core categories, but then a featured category, and it was jeans. And they came back to us afterward and they said, it is the first time in 5 years where jeans hasn't been on our needs list. And again, that's part of what this enables, is that because we were able to go to our members and say, hey, look, there's an organization that needs jeans. I'll bet you have some that you're not wearing. Maybe you weren't ready to give them away yet, but here you go. And so then we do offer a way that people can get receipts for tax write-off purposes, et cetera, as part of the service for the things that they donate. But I'll be honest, that's something that folks do directly with a part of the business that I don't work with, but I know that is a component. But again, for us, the really exciting thing is, how do we help not just drown organizations and things that people traditionally give away, but really highlight the needs that exist. And again, so that is a huge focus. And I'd say a bulk of the time that our local teams spend working with partners is identifying those partners who have needs. What are those needs? And then setting those categories up so that we can help match what people have lying around their house that isn't using and is in danger of being thrown away with organizations that need them.
Okay, thank you. And then I'm just going to make a comment, because I know some of this fluctuation around picking up at the house. I grew up in Wisconsin, where we always had a milk box that looked like that, and the milkman would drop off the milk. And I know that we all have Amazon, so it's interesting to me that we can keep getting more and more and more stuff. But if we want to have a home-based service to distribute the things that we have, that it starts getting tricky. And from a sustainability perspective, I think that is interesting as far as changing the way that I look at things. So I'm really liking, the convenience of the pickup at the house, and recognize, hold on one second, I'm sorry, sorry about that. So I'm just, I'm liking, for me, we have the battery, there's places where we can drop things off. There's a styrofoam place. I know where all the places are. And I don't know if I'm going to say it's me or my husband or somebody that might throw something away we shouldn't be throwing away, instead of taking the time to do that, going to a second place. So I imagine that by being able to just have it from the convenience of your own home, that is going to be where the reduction in those types of harmful items that aren't supposed to go in the garbage are going to go. My biggest concern, and I haven't looked carefully at the website place, is just around, making sure that the things that are going, that are said that are being recycled, and that kind of regulation stuff, I think is really important. Maybe not for you and this generation of people that are starting this up, but just to keep this business operating in a way that is responsible. And I do think that's where government regulation does some of its best work. So I don't know if you have anything around speaking to that, besides like how you report, besides the website information, but your responsibilities of reporting as far as harmful materials, especially I'm thinking about batteries and light bulbs and those types of things. Is there a way that you report that to the government?
So there's a number of regulations that, govern those types of materials that we are on the hook for following regardless. And so, again, depending on the state, there's various jurisdictions that sort of keep an eye on those materials that we do make sure that we comply with. We are working with Metro and DEQ on our facility to make sure that that's handled appropriately and consistent with all the state regs there, state and regional regs there. And then as far as the local level is, I would really just emphasize, I think, we are supportive of new regulations that would say, hey, look, yep, we hadn't thought of this before, but there's this group of items that aren't part of the curbside service, again, for very good reasons. When plastic film goes into the commingled bin, it often gets so wet and contaminated that it can't be recycled. And so it's a very problematic material. Again, the clothes and the reuse. And so there's certainly things that you all can add to a permit that can be created that requires some degree of reporting. We are happy to report all of the materials and the weights and all of that to a local jurisdiction. We do that with a number that we're in, and so would be happy to do so here as well.
All right, that's all my questions. Thanks again. I have heard nothing but good things from the community about their services, so I appreciate what you're doing for the environment.
Thank you so much.
Councilor Sacco, then Council President Grimes, because we have only a few minutes left.
Okay, and I'll be really quick. Thank you. And thank you for your presentation. I'm a big fan of thinking of new ways to recycle, reuse. I think that, we're kind of heading into a dire state with our planet. And so I'm a big fan of, being creative. I think this is a really creative solution. I don't see where it's competing. As you said, and as one of the counselors asked, if, the plastic clamshells become recyclable by our current provider, that would, your program would change. And I think that's great. Where I do have some concern is just making sure, everything fits within code and regulations, and that we go by the book. Because this is a great service providing a wonderful avenue to make our environment better, I still think we need to make sure we do everything by the book, and so that's my greatest concern. And then there was franchise fees mentioned somewhere, and I don't really know a whole lot about franchise fees. We don't need to get into it. But I'm just concerned of any costs associated to the city to get to that point where we do need to, to make changes. Like, is there any concessions made to the city for our time and effort to get everything up to, in code, or whatever needs to happen there? Is there some sort of reimbursement fee, and I don't know how all of that works, but that's a concern. And I was also curious how many people Ridwell employs locally, because I think that's another positive thing that also comes out of your service.
Great, yeah, thank you. Again, we are more than happy if there's new regulations that are created to ensure that anybody who's providing the service is meeting certain standards, and would love to work with you all on sort of what that looks like, and whether it's through the franchise Dropbox idea that has been floated in some meetings, or through some type of permit. I would say in terms of the cost to the city, I feel like it's more than reasonable for reasonable permit fees, or something to ensure that costs are covered as is normal for that type of permitting process. Again, we would, because we operate a little bit differently and we're not demanding a profit, we think innovation in this space is good. We don't think we are the only ones that are going to come up with ways to help with a service that's going to help people with items that can only go into the landfill. And so making sure that we're supportive of making sure there's an opportunity for new entrants to come in such a way that enables other other materials that maybe not part of our service, but still that the city has appropriate oversight into and can cover those costs. So again, we're happy to come up with, again, whether it's a permit or some type of franchise approach. We think that we were fully supportive of that. And I'm sorry, what was your last question? I started to jot it down and then.
I was just curious how many local employees you have.
Oh, yeah, I think we have about 50 employees in the Portland area. So, you know, the bulk of those folks are working in our warehouse and our drivers. You know, we pay well above minimum wage. Folks get benefits from day one. So we want to make sure that we're treating people well, and it's, you know, it's not easy work, and we really appreciate the folks that show up every day and help make this service possible for the households that subscribe.
Council President Grimes.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Weaver, for your presentation tonight. That was very insightful. I don't think anybody here is going to argue that recycling, reusing, repurposing is anything other than a great service and a good thing for our community and the environment. I think where we're stuck is the issue of licensing and the proper oversight for your particular business within our framework. And, you know, it seems to me that there's enough counselors that seem to view this as a positive service that maybe we should talk about starting, you know, to kind of sit down and try to work maybe on a franchising agreement that would make sense with your business, the services you provide, our current code, and our other current franchise partners that we would like to, you know, honor our agreement with them as well. So I don't know if other counselors would be in favor of taking that approach. I mean, we're a little short-staffed right now because our attorney, our city attorney, has taken a new position, and so we're a little short right now. So we might need to possibly kick the discussion a little bit in the future. I don't know, maybe Sherilyn could speak to that. But that's kind of, I think, where I would like to take the discussion, and see what Mayor Bubinik is thinking. But I think, you know, the merits of recycling speak for themselves, but I think, you know, for this to work in Tualatin, we really need to sit down and get the same kind of regulatory framework around this particular product that we expect of our other partners. And were we to do something like that, Sherilyn, would you have a time frame for us, or how would we handle this?
Mayor Bubinik, would you like me to respond, or you've got?
I'll pop in real quick. I think, like you're saying, Council President Grimes, like tonight, I'm taking this as more of a terrific intro to Ridwell for us to discuss with city staff. I think we do want to wait for our full-time city attorney to be on board before we really launch further into this. And in my mind, I also want to find out what DEQ and Metro are going to rule as far as Ridwell's presence in the region before we proceed, because it could be possible that Metro and DEQ deny Ridwell's permits or, you know, continue operations. So I'd just like to, you know, this was a terrific introduction by Mr. Weaver. I learned a lot about Ridwell. I'm encouraged. I know a lot of folks have been emailing me, very supportive of Ridwell, just like you all were. I'm very supportive of the efforts that they're doing. But I think we need to discuss it a little bit more and circle back when we have a city attorney on board. And this way we can have, you know, impactful discussions with Ridwell that, you know, our city attorney, who is in, to move forward with.
Yeah, so just to jump in on that, that would be our staff's recommendation, is to watch what's happening in the region and put it on pause until we're fully staffed, and hopefully by that time we'll have more clarity on the regional situation. And we do believe that there's a path forward with Ridwell, and but just there's some regional things to work out, and I'd like to have a city attorney on.
I think it's terrific that, Mr. Weaver, that you're willing to work within a franchise agreement with us. That's terrific. We just need to wait a little bit till we have our legal beagle back.
Certainly, understand again, we're happy to continue to have that conversation. I would emphasize the local focus, right, is on the collection side, and we have no reason to believe, based on any conversations with Metro and DEQ, that there's any issues with the facility. And there's been some misinformation about that. I'd love to just clear it up. Is that we approached both Metro and DEQ before we started operations. They both told us we did not need a permit and that there was nothing that we needed. They came back many months later and said, wait, well, maybe you do. And we've been working with them. We had some questions that we just needed to work out. Again, the regulations are built for a MRF where materials are being separated and pulled apart and divvied up. And we just tried to understand how that all fit together. But again, we've been given no reason to believe that there's an issue on the facility regulation side. And again, I would just emphasize, we are not against regulation. We are not trying to hide anything. We're not trying to do an end run around anybody, which is some of the accusations that I've heard have been thrown out there. It's just simply not the fact. We offer a optional complimentary service, and it does not touch the existing contracts that exist. And to the extent that you know, cities would like to have a permit or a franchise process that worked for them, we are more than happy to engage and believe that there's a number of different ways that could work.
Terrific. I thought so. Before we wrap this up, Councilor Reyes, did you have your hand up, or?
I just wanted to, I know Nancy, Councilor Grimes mentioned that, you know, we support and all, this is for my fellow councilors, and I feel like well, I would like to discuss this more. I feel like sometimes we rush things and we want to just because of time, but I also want to say that we did see this was part of our, environmentally friendly is part of our goals, is one of our goals from when we set these goals back in a year ago, even 2-3 years ago that I've been in the council. And I think that sometimes I don't want to forget that we have had this conversation, and I do want to come back and discuss it more. Like, what do you think, Councilor Brooks? What do you think, Councilor Hillier, about this stuff? Because I feel like sometimes it's rushed a little bit, and we're not, or we put it on the side, and we don't come back to the conversation. But I do want to just say that and make note of it, that I do want to discuss this, because this is really important. I feel like if we had a code, it was probably, I would like to review that, like to see how long ago that was done, because times have changed and things have changed now. And I am at home more than I've ever been before, and I do see how much trash is collected from deliveries, from things we order, food we order. Nowadays, food is being ordered, like, you know, it comes in those, they want to maintain it cold or warm or whatever, and it comes in all these different containers. I don't know what to do with it. Batteries, computers, things that go, I think that, I don't know, I think I want to really, I don't want to forget this conversation, because it's really important that we look at new ways of how do we can bring in services that can help our community be more mindful of what we have, whether it's recycle, reuse. I just turned in some bags of Amazon that I didn't know what to do with. So I just think that that's just my comment, because sometimes I don't speak, so I just want to make sure that we do come back and we talk about this specific topic of the environment. Thank you.
Oh, terrific. No, I think we'll be circling back, because I think you probably get emails like I have from very satisfied Ridwell customers, you know, being very supportive. And so we'll figure out what we can make work here in conjunction with the jurisdictions around us. So again, thank you, Mr. Weaver, for your very insightful presentation, and we'll be back in touch.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Feel free to follow up at any point with any questions or any follow-up conversations.
All right, thank you. All right, next up on our agenda tonight is parks funding being kicked off with Ross. There's Ross and Rich.
Thank you, Mayor Bubenik and city councilors. And we're excited tonight to talk about really some fantastic conversations that have happened throughout our community over the past few years, whether it be the conversation around our Veterans Memorial, the conversation about Stone Ridge Park, the conversation envisioning for the future of trails in Basalt Creek, some fantastic community conversations happening. And really focused, those are all focused really around the city council goals that council you have come up with, and really about the equitable community and the connected community and the significant compelling gathering spaces that we think about in our future. And so tonight we're here to talk about how do we bring those to reality? How do we take those concepts and those visions and those great community conversations and actually make them something tangible and usable in our community? So we are joined by our consultants, Clark Worth with Barney and Worth and John Horvick with DHM Research, to talk about another great series of conversations we've had, and that's around parks funding. So I'll turn it over to Clark and John.
Thank you, Ross. Appreciate it. We have a PowerPoint that we'll use here and trail along. Ross already introduced us, Clark Worth and John Horvick. We have been working together on this for a bit. We'll show you the results of what we've been doing. And we also, John and I were part of the team that worked on Tualatin Moving Forward in 2017-18. So if you go ahead, we'll show the agenda here. We've been doing some research, public opinion research, and the research actually extends back farther than the most recent stuff that we've been doing. It goes back to 2020, before COVID, before the pandemic. We'll talk about that, but we're going to focus on the research that is the most recent research. And then we're going to talk about what you do with that. If you want to have a funding measure for parks, what's the success formula for getting there? We're going to show an election calendar for 2022. This is the election year. We've been talking about the possibility of an election item, a ballot measure on November 2022 general election, and then leave most of the time for your questions and discussion. The opinion research I mentioned goes back to January of 2020, pre-COVID, with a telephone survey that was done at that time. Since that time, during COVID, there was the Tualatin Community Survey that was done. It's a big survey, had almost 600 participants in the survey. We'll talk a little bit about that and some key things from that. The stakeholder, then the ones highlighted there, stakeholder interviews that were done more recently, with 18 stakeholders, including the mayor and all the members of council, and then a cross-section of other community leaders, including representatives of the Tualatin Parks Recreation Advisory Committee. And then the focus groups, the final thing John's going to talk about are focus groups. We're spinning out of control here. The focus groups that John facilitated back in November. We'll talk about those as well. For the first thing, I mentioned that we'll do it in chronological order here, starting with the community survey. Things, and I'm sure you remember this, city services, the ratings for city services were just sky high. And at the top of the list are libraries and parks. And what you could really see is that libraries and parks contribute to the perception of a high quality of life here. So ask the question, how would you rate this a place to live? Would you recommend it to others? Would you recommend it as a place to raise children? How about your neighborhood? You can see all of those ratings quality of life ratings are very high. However, if you ask about the top issues, what are the top issues that people are concerned about? Again, this is in the middle of COVID. Number one was affordable housing. People are concerned about the economy, and of course, traffic, which by that time probably had begun to come back again. The other thing, the next slide shows one of the questions went specifically to parks funding. And the question was asked, should we do something about parks funding? Should we put a measure in front of voters, a property tax measure in front of voters to consider for parks funding? Or should we just let it go, you know, not worry about it? And what we found is, if looking at the top there, very high percentage, almost 80% said, you should put this something together, put it in front of voters. And then at the bottom there, the opposite of that, the group that says, no, we don't really think you need to get into that, was around about a third of the voters. So again, strong feedback that folks want to see something rather than let parks decline. They would rather see something go on the ballot. So with that in mind, we started talking to stakeholders this fall in November. Again, I mentioned already who was covered. If you flip another slide there, the highlights of the results. One, community leaders are generally supportive of parks and supportive of parks funding. There's a good, strong agreement on what the priorities would be, and we'll talk about this a little bit more from other sources too, and that includes trails, the thing we heard most about, upgrading existing parks, and handling deferred maintenance and safety issues. And the thing to point out there is there's not a lot of discussion there of new parks. It's mostly trails and taking care of what we have, improving on the assets that we have now. We also asked about the utility, the park's utility fee, and found that that really is no longer an issue. And John will also mention, we brought that up in the focus groups with voters, and it wasn't an issue there either. That stakeholders, the group of stakeholders that we're talking about, which includes you, the main thing that people said was, but it's just not enough. You know, producing $700,000 a year, and that helps, but it's really not enough to take care of all of the needs that we have with parks. And in the end, asking about funding sources, the general advice, the group advice was put together an affordable bond measure and a grassroots campaign that offers something for everyone. Moving on, John is going to talk a little bit about the focus groups, which sadly were held the same day. We had great participation, but they were held the same day as the grand opening for the Garden Corner Curves. So I missed that. Ross probably missed at least part of it. But I know that was a fantastic event that most of you were at. Well, while you were there, if you can picture in your minds, John and I were locked up in a room listening to randomly selected voters talk about parks.
Thank you, Clark. John Harvick with DHM Research. A pleasure to be with you and to be working with the city of Tualatin again. We did do some focus groups right before Thanksgiving. The date there is important because that was before sort of the new variant took off. But because it was before that, we had an opportunity to be in person. And you can see that the folks had masks there, and they were great participants and participated well with following all the protocol. And they were eager to participate. We typically recruit about 12 folks, hoping that 8 or 9 show up. And we had, of the 24 people we recruited across the 2 groups, we had 23 participate. They were recruited at random from lists of registered voters, so there are lots of different ways to get community feedback. Surveys, town hall meetings, public comments, city council meetings. Focus groups is one other tool we have. These are in-depth conversations with groups of people who are from the community and then who are broadly represented in the community. So by age and by gender, by political affiliation, we try to keep an eye on all of those so that the folks that we're talking to, we not only can ask representative people what they think, but go deep into it as well. Just so you know, all the groups participate, or all the groups consist of both conversation and what we call written exercises. We want to have give people an opportunity to participate in different ways. For those who are strong orally communicating, gregarious, maybe they have that chance to speak to the group. For those who maybe feel more confident and more articulate writing, they get that opportunity too. Also with the written exercises, we're always getting a sense of what people's opinions are before they talk about them as a group. And if their opinions change because they hear what others have to say, that's a great learning opportunity. And if they hold steady, that sets a learning opportunity too. But it's all that. Everything's videotaped and written, transcripts of everything. So we have all the good data that we can analyze that. So that's the background, but the important stuff is the results. We began the groups talking sort of big picture, what's important in the community. Two things we're paying attention to here. First, what do people talk about? So then we could maybe think in the future about how to connect back to this measure to the things that they care about. And also listing, is parks on that top of mind list? Parks aren't, okay? There are other things on people's minds, especially traffic, okay? That actually is an opportunity, I think, as we'll talk about a little bit more. Other thing we're listening for and asked about is just, gosh, how satisfied are you with city services, including parks? One, as Clark talked about from the survey data, like people are pretty happy. People felt pretty good about Tualatin. And that's a bit of an unusual thing today. Lots of communities I'm dealing with right now, folks are very disgruntled, and that wasn't what we really were hearing. Now, specifically with parks, it wasn't they're the best thing ever or they're awful. What we heard was, no, they're well maintained, they're adequate, they're okay. Often they thought about the parks in comparison to other nearby communities, okay? So like Oswego's got this, or West Lynn has that. Now, a downside to that is sometimes like, well, I can get what I want in some other place that's nearby, and therefore not the priority of making the investment necessarily locally. So that's a challenge to overcome, to educate people about what the opportunities are and the differences between the different places. Also, just sort of an FYI, not that many folks know who operates Tualatin Parks. And so there's, as you begin to have a conversation, thinking about, who are the trusted messengers? Are you the trusted messenger, well-known messenger? That's not unusual for Tualatin at all. Folks' sort of knowledge of the ABCs in government, pretty typical, but I just want to impart on you that they don't know a lot about that, nor do they know how things are funded. Okay, so how the property tax system works in Oregon and other sort of tax systems work. As you move forward, the education piece is be aware that voters typically don't know where the dollars come from. Now, most folks were not initially supportive of the bond measure. Okay, and it's typically because they just said we got other important things in the community that we want to deal with, especially transportation. But when we walked through with them about the different types of projects that could be funded, and talked to them about what their priorities were, support did increase. Particularly if we, framed it as if you knew that you could get your projects funded, how much would you value that, and especially how much would you pay for that? And typically, the typical amount was between $75 and $200 per year. We had a few people who were really energetic about making investments, and that pulled the average up to 200. The median amount was 75. That's probably a decent number sort of to keep in mind. That's the midpoint. The thing that people were most attracted to were trails, access to natural areas. Improving existing parks was also popular, but especially trails, access to existing natural areas. And that's that hook, as Clark just turned back to making the place having easy access, that transportation, walkable. And Clark, did you want to take this, or did you want me to move forward with this as well?
Take over here. When you put all of this opinion research together, we think the priorities are very clear. We're thinking as voters think. If we look at the park's goals, the goals that come out of the top, John was getting to that, creating a walkable, bikeable community with interconnected trails. And we heard the words connected, connections a lot. People feel that the parks, the trails connect them to the community, they connect them with one another. Second goal there, maintaining the parks. And again, I contrasted that earlier with building new parks. Priority is maintaining the parks. And then third, expanding access to parks in the parts of the community that lack that access now. Looking at the investments in parks, again, these are in priority order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. if we ask people, where would you spend money? Where would you invest? And John said, this is really important because if we then say, well, what if you got the things that you want and your priorities, well, then they're much more likely to support it. So the priorities in order are: 1, connected trails; 2, upgrades to existing parks, match the values up above there; 3, nature parks, natural areas; 4, river access. It came up a lot in the focus groups. Access to the Tuolumne River, for example, to put your place you could put your kayak in the water. 5th, playground equipment, and then finally large lawns, which people brought up as having the potential for multiple use. Hey, we can program that ourselves for what we want. Also, one more slide there on this. We also were able to identify for swing voters from that first January 2020 poll, what pulls them along, the people who haven't decided but maybe are adaptable, amenable to the idea, and that is, back again, connected trails, park renovation, and playground equipment. So those are the things that swing the people who aren't quite convinced. And we also have an idea about what the least popular projects were, and some of those will surprise you. The one that surprised me, which we've talked about a lot, is just identifying that it's in the Parks Master Plan doesn't hold any sway with folks. You know, maybe they don't like the word master plan, maybe it sounds too bureaucratic, but we have to identify priorities, not just because they're in the Parks Master Plan, but because they align with what voters want. The next slide shows the success formula that we can identify from all of this research to pass ballot measure in November 2022. John has estimated that voter turnout will be around 70%. And then Libby Bakke in our office is unerringly accurate at predicting exactly how many yes votes that will take to pass the ballot measure. And Libby's number is 5,300 yes votes. And that's important because all of us can start thinking now, what do we need to do to get 5,300 yes votes? And the items that are mentioned there, one is this has to be community driven with authentic public engagement. That's part of the formula that people have told us in the focus groups, talking with stakeholders. 2, there has to be something for everyone. So when people see the list of what's being funded, we need to be thinking about all areas, the city, all ages, for example, as the something for everyone examples. It needs to include voters' priority projects, and we've been reviewing what's at the top of voters' priority list. We need to be mindful of a couple of things. One, most residents don't regularly use parks. It's a minority of residents who use parks. Everybody we showed you, everybody's got good feelings about parks, but a lot of people don't go there all the time. And a good example for this being important is schools now. You think of schools having to be funded, maybe 25% of households have a school-aged child in the household. So there are a lot more voters that schools need. Parks are the same kind of thing. You know, we have to bring along a lot of voters who aren't necessarily benefiting directly, regularly, routinely from that service. And then another thing which John raised here is most people think our parks are in pretty good condition. So there's a little education process to go along here about what parks needs are. And a third thing to be mindful of is November election is right at the time when people are paying their property taxes. So they've already got their bill. Some of them have already written the check, and some of them are getting close to writing the check. But so this is a time when people are unusually sensitive to talking about taxes and hearing about taxes and having devoted support of more taxes. And then finally, the importance of right-sizing the funding ask, not asking for too much. We want to know what voters will support. And one of the reasons that we'll talk about doing a telephone poll here is to get at exactly that. We want it, and from the information that we have so far, we think that the range is probably in the $30 million to $50 million range. So if we have $200+ million of park needs that have been identified in the master plan, we know that that ask, when it's right sized, is not going to pay for all of those park needs. There are going to be a number of things on the list that just can't be paid for because not because we can't put it on the the ballot measure, but because voters won't support it. And we'll know from the telephone survey, we'll have a better idea what that is. Now, what would this look like going forward with public education? And we think it would look something like this. To all moving forward parks, you probably recognize that brand. It's the same one that was used for transportation, but this time specific to parks, connecting parks, paths, and people. And this is not the brand, this is not campaign, so it just gives you an idea of how you might talk about this with voters. And then I also mentioned the importance of having something for everyone. This is a map of parks and trails. The distribution is showing against the CIO map there. And the idea would be to have something that this ballot measure offers in every part of the city. And then looking at the election calendar, the orange stuff there is where we are now. It's really done in phases, and we've set it up that way so the decision can be made moving along at each stage. Do we know enough that we have a chance for being successful before you move to the next stage? The stage that we're in now, we intend to do a telephone survey. We're looking at the idea of refining now some funding options and messaging so that we'd be able to test that in a telephone survey in March. So by mid-March or by the end of March, we'll have the results of that next increment of opinion research. That's very important because the opinion research that we've done most recently is qualitative research, and it's really useful to us for a lot of purposes. But this is where we'll be able to test what are voters ready to support. What are the numbers look like? And those numbers will be very important, and we'll be back to you at that stage with the numbers. Later on, there's a lot of time here the city has to develop this, but during that time, the public education really needs to happen. Then in August, the city council would have to take action on if there is going to be a ballot measured in September or going on the ballot in September for the November election. Up until the time that the council files that ballot measure, the city is unconstrained about public education process here. Once it's filed, then Ross and his staff, Sherilyn, they're really limited in what they can do. Public education is still appropriate, still important, but there are limitations on what they can do. City council members are a little less constrained, and of course, the community members aren't constrained at all. So any legitimate grassroots campaign effort can take place all the way up to election day. So it's, again, kind of in phases there. And then this next phase will conclude with the results of the telephone survey in March, with decisions being made on that. With that, I think we're ready for discussion. So that now it's time for you to hit the ball back and forth across the net.
Clark, if I can add just really quickly before we do that, this conversation, this similar conversation, this presentation has already taken place at our Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee. And so we've got a really engaged group, really knowledgeable group, and led by Beth Dippin, who I believe is on the call on this meeting right now. So listening in. So I just wanted to share that with you, that we've already been to T Park with this topic. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Questions for any of the presenters, for Clark or John? Councilor Pratt.
I'm glad nobody cares about the master plan, but good thing a lot of the good thing a lot of the projects are the things people in the master plan are the things that people want. My question, I guess, is you said a majority of people don't use the parks, but we have, what, 27,000 people, and we need 5,300 votes. That's just under 20%. So how many people does anybody have a clue? Because whenever it's not raining, I see a lot of people on parks and trails. So I'm just wondering if you have any guess of how many people do use the parks in our community. Do we have 20% using them? Does anybody know that answer?
I can't tell you from the work that we've done. I know from other similar surveys that it is in the 25 to 40% range. John may have some real numbers here, but in the 25% to 40% range of people that regularly use parks. Like if you ask, have you used a park in the last 6 months or something? John, maybe you have a real number.
That's the reason. Of course, it's going to vary by community and how you frame the question. But that's it. And then you have your intense users, of course, and then folks who are not going to use it much at all. But that doesn't. Parks measures we pass, school measures pass all the time, right? And most households, about 75%, as Clark said, about 75% of households don't have kids in them. But so there's opportunities to get non-users to understand that they benefit the community. But we should assume that those who are most engaged are going to be our activists and best folks to get to yes.
And then I just have a comment. I find it interesting that I know there's a good faction of people in this community that would love to see more sports fields, and that didn't seem to be mentioned. So I think it'll be interesting when you do your telephone poll if that gets brought up more.
Yeah, for sure. We'll certainly be listening for that. I would say that in the focus groups, there were some passionate folks about sports fields, but the passion isn't broad, right? It's very, for lack of a better word, niche for certain groups. But if you weren't using them, it wasn't something that you necessarily felt was a priority. The nice thing about parks and trails, trails and nature parks and that sort of thing is that broadly accessible, you can use them for multiple purposes. And with the trails, it connects to what people did say was the most important issue, which is getting people moving throughout the community. And that really resonates with folks.
Yeah, sports field thing too.
Sorry.
Go ahead, sorry. The sports fields.
Oh, go ahead.
The lighting for sports fields came up quite a bit in the focus groups, and so we know that the lighting for your sports fields is an issue. But the thing to keep in mind for sports fields is you're not the only ones in the business. People around who have kids and teams are using sports fields in neighboring communities. The public schools have sports fields, and so I think that they may not be looking to Tualatin Parks for the solution there in every instance.
Yeah, I think we'll be discussing that soon. And then, sorry, I just lost my. Oh, I guess my last question is, if we're fortunate and this went through and passed, would it end up just being, because a lot of these things are on the master plan priority, would you just go through and fund the things that meet the criteria of this? For instance, Tualatin Community Park, I know, is on that list of repurposing and rethinking it, and trails. So would it just kind of be matched up at that point to find the projects that would match the priorities that have been identified in the master plan?
But I think that's in your hands.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a future question. Sorry.
That's what the policymakers.
Okay, thank you.
Voters' priorities, but really those decisions are your decisions.
I recall when we did, well, I'm trying to remember now, it's a blur with COVID. I know Nancy was there when we went through our Tualatin Moving Forward transportation discussion, and the bond for that is that we decided on a bond amount, a grand total dollar amount, and then we focused in our projects. So we had very specific projects that we offered up to the public that would be funded. So it'd be part of council's deliberations on this. Of okay, do we want to move forward with something? What's the dollar amount going to be? What's the assessment? And then you get into, as Clark and John were saying, distributing projects to the 6 CIOs, equitably, so that everyone has access to improved parks. But that's something that we did versus the research folks. I think I saw Councilor Hilliard's hand up, and then Councilor Brooks.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. Everyone, I'm sorry, I don't have my right glasses on, so I just can't look at the screen. I apologize. I guess what I'm wondering is, you indicated that the #1 concern folks have is traffic. And so I'm wondering what sort of evidence there is that with increasing the trails, specifically, if that's the #1 goal, then people identified as what they would choose to fund. What, I mean, is there evidence from other communities that if we increase a certain trail to this or to that, that it will help people, you know, go to the store or go to work or whatever, enough to actually impact the traffic in our community? Because I think that's what I heard, is that traffic was the #1 concern.
Well, I'll just, Clark, please weigh in. Is a public opinion researcher, that I would struggle to answer. You know, transportation engineers and planners probably be better suited for that. But it is directly what our participants thought could happen if parks, excuse me, if nature trails, if trails and such were better connections existed. That's what they told us that they wanted and that they saw could happen from this. So from a sort of public opinion and sort of maybe sort of campaign sort of perspective, but those were connections that the voters made from an actual transportation engineering plan. I'm not sure if Clark can line any or others.
Councilor Brooks and then Councilor Saka.
Thank you for your presentation. I appreciate the thoughtfulness, and I'm kind of delving into the messaging as well as far as connectivity. And, you know, when I'm thinking about, it sounds to me like they're saying that because of some of the traffic and some of the barriers that we have, that parks is a place that we can connect instead of be in this barrier of traffic or whatever. So getting together on paths and walking and connecting, getting to different sides of our community in from alternate ways, since we're right here locally, that's kind of what I am hearing. And I guess for when you say like $30 million bond, $75. So how many years is that?
You know, that's a decision to be made, whether it's 10 years, 20 years, and that affects what the level of the property tax would be to pay for it. So that's to be determined here. We really don't have that yet, but we're thinking that something could be supported in that dollar range.
Per 75, okay. So that's what I want to get clear on. And then I guess I'm curious, just from your perspective of having done this work, is there something that particularly, besides connectivity, because I really hear that and I understand we're pushing on that's really important if we want to get this done, which personally I do, especially for our ADA needs here and updating that kind of connectivity as well for everybody. But I'm just curious if there's anything that was particularly unique or surprising that stuck out to either one of you about doing your work. And thanks again.
One of the things that stands out to me, this doesn't guarantee success, and Clark laid out the success factors, which I think we should really lean into. Not to say that there aren't challenges in Tualatin or that everybody's happy, but just relatively, it's hard to express how negative voters are right now. And we're just picking that up in every corner of the state. And there just wasn't the attitude and atmosphere there was in the room. So that's one thing that I think you have going for it, that there was relatively high levels of satisfaction with the services that people are getting, value for the taxes that they're paying, and confidence in leadership. It's not only Tualatin, I wouldn't say like an absolute surprise to see it here, but I've been delivering a lot of negative news lately. And just, it was qualitatively different among these participants that I've been hearing in other places.
I think
That's great to hear.
Let's say two things for me that really jumped out. One of them is walking trails, you know, people that really, and both John and I have seen some statewide surveys looking at asking people what activities they like right now, and that's really, that came out over and over again. Second thing was that there's a special thing going on during COVID We heard about it from anyone who had school-age children. It gives us, parks give us an opportunity to get out of the house. That's a safe place I can go and take my kids right now during the pandemic. So that is something that was really unique. And so there's a role that parks play in that, connecting folks to the community. And I'm not sure exactly how we take advantage of that, but I think there is a great opportunity there. It may be sometimes unsaid about that special role that parks play.
Well, thank you for that. And I can very much identify with that because I think some of the things I'm doing is definitely being out, walking more, and being in the parks since there's limitations about where to go inside that's safe. So I appreciate that. And I hope too with health and well-being and people's just desire to thrive and feel good, especially when faced with illness and that conversation all the time, that there'll be habits that are positive that we find ourselves with coming out of the pandemic, and hopefully walking more and being outside more will be one of those things. All right, thank you very much.
Councilor Sacco.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation and work. It's very insightful. I do have two questions. My first question is, it looks like we've surveyed about 2.5% of our residents. And so my question is, do you feel like that's with the cross-section that we've surveyed, is that a good representation based on your previous work of how the majority of the voters will vote? And then my second question, you talked about November and being the time where, we're paying our property taxes. Do you have any statistics on ballot measures like this passing in spring versus fall?
Let me try to answer the first and give partial answer to the second, and Clark will probably want to weigh in too. First of all, DHM and Barney Worth didn't do those surveys, so I just for a point of clarification, they were done by somebody else. A survey total sample size is relevant. This is sort of kind of like stats 101 sort of stuff, so not all details, but the population of the overall universe that you're pulling from is almost irrelevant mathematically. So the 2.7%, the sample size for those surveys would be just as accurate in Tualatin as it would be in Oregon as it would be for the country. The question is how representative is it? Do you have the right mix of men and women and older folks and younger folks and one part of the community, another part of the community? Those are the things that are crucial to keep an eye on and make sure you're getting that right mix. And for this survey, we want to model that specifically for the November 2022 election, which is different than the general population or different than a main primary. So I want to think of what's the party mix for that, and what's the age sort of mix. And we're aiming for a sample size of 300. That has a margin of error top of head, I think 5.7%. I have to double check that, but I think that's right. And that would be true in Tualatin or Oregon or America. That the universe doesn't affect that. We'd love it to be more, but given response rates of what they are nowadays, it's probably a reasonable number to aim for in the city of Tualatin. Your second question, I've done a lot of looking at election cycle and likelihood of outcome for success. There's not a huge difference between primaries and general elections, and it's kind of changes year by year. There is a big difference on what goes on the ballot and how much is on the ballot. In bad economic times, fewer things tend to go to the ballot. That doesn't mean that they tend to be less successful, but I think the local governments are more careful about what they put on the ballot as part of the explanation. We do know, and we'll have to be paying attention to, the mix of voters in a general election is different than a mix of voters in other elections, particularly more young people vote. And my guess is that is an opportunity for us. I think younger people are going to be more active parks users and want to grab them. But when we do the survey, we can look at vote history and see, do likely voters feel different? Likely voters, people who vote in every election, right? Are they more apt to support this measure, or are different types of voters more apt to support this measure? And we can report back on that to the extent that affects decision making, then that can inform.
Yeah, the likely, just weigh in a little bit on the November versus May. November elections in an even numbered year are generally speaking higher voter turnout. And John has predicted this will be around 70%. And it's much higher than that among people who are affiliated with either party. Their turnout is even higher. If we were running this at this past November, we had issues on the ballot. Then we would want to survey likely voters. John mentioned what those are. They're basically, in summary, they're people who look like me but don't vote like me. They tend to be older guys who vote in every single election, and a higher proportion of those are no voters. They're automatic no voters. They vote against every ballot measure that requires funding. And they've never met a ballot measure that they like, they're willing to spend money on. And that, in Oregon, that's around 25% to a third of voters. So it's a pretty big number. In the general elections, like the one in the fall, the voters are more likely to look like you than like me, the typical voter. Much younger, more likely to be female, and more open to considering funding measures. So November 2022 is good election to be running something like this. And so John, in his upcoming telephone survey, he'll be surveying registered voters, not just the likely voters that we would be definitely surveying if we had a special election, for example. We'd be looking at what likely voters think. It's good to pay attention to both because, again, for sure the likely voters are going to be there. And if you can win over likely voters, the May 2018 Tualatin Moving Forward election was designed around likely voters. So we had to win over those people who are less likely to support the measure. And we did. We did do that. In this case, yeah.
Oh, just one other piece of context. You go back the last couple of decades, 2.5 decades, about 6 out of 10 local funding measures passed in the ballot in Oregon. Now that's general elections, primary, special elections, but look at all of them, about 6 out of 10 pass. During COVID, about 7 out of 10 to 75% of them have been passing these elections. I don't know what the environment's going to be a year from now. I mean, all sorts of reasons to think it could be different, but this has been actually the last 3 elections have been a pretty good environment for local funding measures.
Councilor Reyes.
Thank you for your presentation. So in order for us to, as a council, think of investing our money, how do you do your segmentation of list to find out who you're calling and what kind of profile are you looking for? Sure. I'm noticing there's a different crowd that likes to walk, but there are also crowds that are raising kids and they need swings, they need activities, so those are just different crowds. I'm wondering how you segment your list or create a profile for those phone calls.
Yeah, that's a really good question. When we're doing a survey like this, we're trying to talk to voters, and we are here. We tend to start, and we will hear, from a list of registered voters from the Secretary of State. Oregon, we're fortunate because we have automatic voter registration. In Oregon, about 95% of those who are eligible to vote are now registered. So that's like the most comprehensive list you could get anywhere. Plus, we can supplement and match that list for accuracy with the existing utility list from the city of Tualatin. Combination of those two is sort of where we pull from. And then we make sure that the sample itself is going to be representative, at least on these criteria: age, gender, political party affiliation. That does matter when we're thinking about what turnout's going to be. Education, race, and ethnicity. Within that, if we get all those categories right, we're going to have different parks users. We're going to have younger people with kids. We're going to have folks who are older and less active in the parks. But we know that those are the demographic characteristics that really can shape attitudes on any sort of election matter, and we'll make sure that we're keeping tabs of them and pulling a sample that is representative of those characteristics.
Are there any different languages do you provide this in different?
Right now, we're planning to do it in both English and Spanish.
Other questions? Right. I've only got one. So you mentioned the $75 a year seemed to be the median. Was that in addition to the park fee or to replace the existing park fee, or did you get into that?
We didn't get into that, although the nature of the conversation was in addition to. As Clark said, the parks fee didn't come up in the groups unless prompted, and when we did prompt them, only a couple of people were even aware, and those who were aware had no pushback on them. The context of the conversation was the levy on top of what people are already paying.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? So we just for the question for the council, so we can give direction to staff. Sounds like we're pretty supportive of continuing research on this subject, and in the coming months diving into kind of the process we did for Tualatin moving forward transportation, and getting into finding out more about what the results of the surveys are, and maybe crafting something over the coming months for the possible ballot measure in November. Is that the correct summary?
I just had one question. I'm sorry, but you had just said levy and earlier said bond, so I was just curious about.
Oh, right.
Go ahead, John.
Oh, if I'm mixing up the language, that's just my error. The decision about the funding mechanism is yours.
Okay.
Yep. So we want to have these folks continue work and get back to us with their findings so we can continue on in the discussion, make a decision later this year. Sound good? All right. Looks good. All right. So with that, thank you, gentlemen, for that discussion. That brings us to council meeting agenda review, communications, and roundtable. First thing is, I believe Councilor Brooks has double duty tonight. She'll be doing the moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance. So you prepared for that? All right.
Love it.
Any questions on the consent agenda tonight? All right. And then, let me see, I don't believe we have any proclamations, right? We have quite a few announcements, and then we get into our hearings and general business. So yeah, no proclamations. So with the few moments we have left before we launch the roundtable, I'd like to give Sherilyn an opportunity to introduce Chad Jacobs, who is going to act as our interim city attorney until we replace Sean. It's going to be tough to do, but I'm sure someone's out there who's just as good as Sean, but hopefully they'll have the same sense of humor. But Sherilyn, the floor is yours to introduce Chad.
Well, thank you. Yes, I'm very pleased to introduce Chad Jacobs. Chad is a partner with Barry Elsner and Hammond out of they exclusively work with local governments, and I've worked with Chad before. Previously he was at the League of Oregon Cities, and when I was on the board there, and just has a stellar reputation in the industry, and we're very lucky that Chad has been engaged and is going to help us through in this interim time while we recruit for a new city attorney. So Chad is on camera. I don't know if you want to say hi. And
hey, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to working with each of you, and more importantly, working with you to find a new city attorney to replace Sean. And as the mayor said, it's going to be big shoes to fill, but we're already getting some interest from folks out there, and you have a wonderful community. I don't think it's going to be that hard to recruit someone, so we'll work hard to get someone in place as soon as possible.
All right. I don't know if you ever saw our past city council meetings. We're going to keep you on your feet.
Sounds good.
Yep. Sean would have to correct us quite a few times on our parliamentary procedure when we drop the ball, especially me. So I'm going to appreciate it tonight, because with a quasi-judicial hearing tonight, we'll test you out right off on your first meeting. So welcome, and look forward to working with you.
Likewise.
All right. So we've got about 15 minutes, so we'll start with council communications, because you never know, they could be short, they could be long. And I'll start in order of cameras I see here. So Councilor Reyes.
No meetings in the last couple of weeks. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Councilor Sacco.
I don't have anything either. Thank you.
Councilor Hillier.
Don't have anything other than today is National Give a Compliment to Someone Today. So find a way to make someone smile between now and the end of the day.
Councilor Pratt.
Well, y'all look great today, so there you go. I attended 2 meetings last week on Wednesday. It was the C4 Metro Committee and then the I-205 Diversion Subcommittee, and ODOT at the Diversion Subcommittee meeting rolled out their latest presentation. I assume it was their first time through, so I'm assuming that's what we'll be seeing. And they identified with the I-205 diversion, the intersections that will be affected, and then they identified 50 intersections, that identified 20 that would be impacted by tolling according to them. They culled it down to 5 that would go from a good rating to failing because specifically of the tolling. And they kind of implied the other 15, I forgot how he said it, but it really, it was basically, well, these are failing or bad intersections, so we may or may not do, and we'll look at them. We're kind of on our, so I mean, I spoke up and quite a few other people did afterwards, but so for us, it's like Stafford Borland Road, that traffic circle there, they've identified as something that's going to be is okay now and is bad, so they're going to work on that. But then 65th and Borland, that's like, well, that's on their we'll see list. And so I spoke up, and to me, I would think an intersection like that that's failing, if you have, say, I don't know, I'm picking a random number, if you have 1,000 cars going through there an hour and it's clogged up, if you add 200 or 300 more, you're just making it that much worse. So that should be the first thing to deal with. So, and a lot of other people spoke up, and but I just want you to have that background for when they come to us, that they have their own way of working. So they need questioning. That's it.
Well, especially since 65th and Borland's got this pesky little hospital on it that people need to get to. All right. Thank you, Councilor Pratt. Councilor Brooks.
Thank you, Mayor. I had an executive committee meeting with the regional water providers, and that's just a pre-meeting for the regular board meeting, which will be on the 2nd or 3rd of this month coming up. So more for that. One of the things we have to relook at is the budget because of how the staff expenses have changed due to, I think, COLA. And then we're going to also have an expert there that's going to answer questions. And that's kind of an interesting conversation, and I'll have more around that at the next briefing, but it has to do with who can help with water infrastructure support and funding, and the person who you think could help can't help, but who can help is ODOT, believe it or not. And so understanding the whole hierarchy of structure of funding for drinking water is something that I think is really interesting, especially when we're thinking about resiliency in our city, in our region. I also had the January PAB meeting, which we prepped for this coming week. I'll be doing the Zoom grants this week to rate the applicants. One interesting thing was the applications for cities for connectivity and those transportation projects that are funded by the Community Development Block Grants. There was only one application, so that city has a pretty good chance of getting it. And I've talked to our city folks about that too, just in case there's any opportunities that might come up for the next funding cycle. There were also quite a few applications from organizations from the city of Tigard, so just keeping an eye open for that and new resources. Also, the Tualatin Arts Advisory Committee met on the 18th, and we went through a rating process for more art that's going to wrap utility boxes you might have seen around the community. And this is cool because there's going to be an invitation for the community to look at the juried selections. And I think they picked the top 10 or 12 or something like that. And so you can go look and do your own vote. And whoever gets the highest votes, that will be selected for weighing in by the Arts Committee when the final decisions are being made. The other thing is that there is a way for businesses or individuals to sponsor RAP. So if there's an area, I think we can fund 2 this year. So if there's one that somebody wants to get funded near their business, that is something that you can fill out the form or connect with the Parks Department on and share the news. And I think that is it. It's going to be a busy week for doing the Zoom grants.
Thank you. Council President Grimes.
The other thing I did, sorry, I saw the mayor today. I met with city leaders and Congresswoman Bonamici. And, you know, we're going to be in a different district after this year, District 6. So I was grateful to have the opportunity to thank her for being an advocate, especially with STEAM in our area and the environment and kids and connectivity. And I'm sure the mayor has more to say, but there were a lot of really good questions from our city leaders around her district. And as those districts change next year, we have 1 more year. So if there's a letter of thanks or anything that you want to reach out and talk to her about, she'll still be there for us, but it's a good year to connect.
All right, Council President Grimes.
Thank you. I have no updates to share, but I would like to say a huge thank you to the city councilors that are working, especially on the tolling and attending the meetings and working with ODOT and the other jurisdictions as we wade through this tolling on 205 project, because I have so many concerns about what it means for our community, and I'm so concerned about it. And I just feel so good knowing that our community is represented by you guys, and I really appreciate the work you're doing and digging for answers and holding people accountable and holding people's feet to the fire to get rational, thoughtful answers to our concerns. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for doing that. So thank you guys.
All right, thank you.
And ladies.
All right, I basically, as Council President Grimes just said, my last 2 weeks has been I-205 tolling all the time, all day, because the Oregon Transportation Committee or Commission meeting where they were taking public comment on those things that are on their radar. So the cities of Clackamas County were in hyperdrive to get letters to the OTC and also to have city councils pass resolutions, proclamations, just to get the message out about where the city county, especially those going to be, we are segmented 205 in my meeting with Clackamas County Chair Smith. She was the second person to testify to the OTC. She presented the letter that you've all seen, that all the mayors of Clackamas County signed on to. They're going to be impacted by the tolling. She thought it generally went well. Couldn't really get a temperature check, but was told offline that they are hearing the message and they are concerned. They haven't made any decisions yet, so of course, continue doing that. We're not at all. Washington County is also giving feedback to the OTC as well as the city. We all know that later this evening we'll be passing a resolution in regards to the tolling, because as Council President Grimes said, the ODOT plan as it is now isn't great. It needs to be tweaked. It needs to take into account certain things that hasn't been addressed well, as Councilor Pratt said, number one being diversion. Then the last thing I have is, yes, earlier today, Congresswoman Bonamici had a town hall with Washington County electeds. She's super busy trying to get things done from everywhere from, we had state legislators, county commissioners, city officials, school districts, so she's got her hands full. But as Council Brooks says, we still have her for another year. If you've been paying attention, there are a lot of folks running for Congressional District 6. Many of those will probably start reaching out to you to start talking to you. There's quite a full slate of Democrats and Republicans hoping to be the first congressperson for the new District 6. And with that, I'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting. We have about a 4-minute break till we kick in with the full City Council regular meeting. So we'll see you in about 4 minutes.